So I'd like to start off with just kind of a quick intro. Today's guest is someone who has built one of the most interesting education and innovations in Orange County. Kapil Mathur is the founder and executive director of the Orange County Academy of Sciences and Arts, also known as OCASA, one of the fastest growing project-based learning charter systems in Southern California. He's also a Chapman alum, which we just talked about, with a dual background in chemistry and biology, which will be kind of fun to dig into, but later earning his MBA from UCLA Anderson. His career spans defense tech, where he worked with the Navy Marine Corps, specifically on the intranet program, which, for those of you who don't know, was one of the largest IT infrastructure projects in U.S. military history. And then he went on to run multiple mathnasium learning centers to ultimately, I believe, where you're at now, launching OCASA from scratch. Kapil wrote the original charter petition himself. Fun fact, secured a unanimous 5-0 approval with no conditions, a first for the county, opened OCASA with 270 students, and has since grown it into a multi-campus TK-12 system with extensive wait lists, major grants, and a brand new 4-story Tustin campus, now currently under development, correct?
Yes, under construction right now.
That's fantastic. So I'll wrap it up here, but he's blended hands-on learning, STEAM education, and a student's first status quo second philosophy, challenging traditional models to create a school where kids genuinely want to be. So today we're going to explore how you built the school system from nothing, what innovation in education really looks like in your opinion, and what the future of learning should be. So Kapil, again, thanks for being here, and I'm excited to kick this off.
Great. Thanks a lot for having me.
So I'd love to just start with a little bit of founding/origin story. Tell us a little bit about where you're from, where you grew up, maybe a little bit about your family.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up here in Orange County. I went to school 1st grade through 12th grade in Orange Unified School District public schools. When I graduated from high school, I came to Chapman and I thought I was going to be a medical doctor. And so I enrolled in Chapman as a chemistry major, ended up doing chemistry bio with a minor of philosophy. 29 years ago, graduated in 1996. I was able actually to graduate my undergraduate in 3 years instead of 4.
We get a smart one here.
I don't know about smart, but
Driven,
hardworking, and really understanding how the systems work. So the reason why I was able to complete a 4-year education in 3 years was when I was in high school, I did dual enrollment courses at the community college. So I had taken a number of courses already at a college level. I also had taken some AP courses when I was in high school. So I actually entered with advanced standing when I came to Chapman. And I was benefited greatly from that because that gave me a lot of flexibility in the classes that I took. Because the classes that maybe you only take because it's a requirement, I had a lot of those requirements already done. So I was really able to explore my interests when I was at Chapman, both in the sciences and outside. I added the university honors program after I started because I was really enjoying that freshman seminar. I don't know if they still do those things today, but I was able to take a really diverse set of classes, and I was able to explore a lot of fun things. I was a DJ on the Chapman student radio, which, typically you think of a pre-med student as they're in the lab all day long. But because I had mentors and educators when I was in high school who had really instilled in me, like, explore your interests, I was able to really benefit when I went to college. When I had a career where I was doing tech consulting, contracting, as you mentioned, primarily with the military, which was great. When you're young and single, I was traveling all around the world, doing all of those kinds of things, but not really conducive to a family life. So, after I got married.
And can you real quick talk a little bit about this transition out of college and into tech consulting. Is this something that you identified throughout your education where you're like, man, I really want to get into technology consulting, and you maybe took a class in college, or how did you end up landing in that? And the reason I ask is we've got a lot of students in the program, a lot of whom are about to graduate and
Sure.
trying to figure out where their position is in the real world. And I think one challenge that a lot of these students have is really identifying a space, whether it be an industry, a sector, and a role. What am I actually doing in said sector? So was this just something you fell into, or were you like, man, I really want to get into defense tech, or how'd you land there?
So I think it was a lot easier before, because everything was very new at the time. Again, back when I was in high school, I had one of my teachers who said, "Hey, we're thinking about getting this thing called the internet for the school,
The internet.
and we need we think we need a homepage. Here's a book. Can you read this book and make a homepage?" It was a book called How to Code HTML in 14 Days. So I read that book and I created the web page for my school. This was pre-Netscape, so no pictures, green screen. I don't think anybody ever actually used it, but I did that, and that's sort of right before the whole .com thing was about to start, and everybody was looking for who can do this. So I had, primarily colleagues of my parents who would call them and ask their advice, like, "Hey, our funders are asking us what is our internet strategy." And so, my mom said, "Hey, you need to talk to my son. He knows how to do all of this stuff." So
Because you read about it in a book.
because I read about it in a
I
book.
love that. Yeah.
I don't think I took any computer science or technology classes at Chapman. Dr. Fahey was my calculus professor. I think he's now super senior at Chapman. He's a great guy. He also, at the time, was the person who was in charge of the Chapman web server. So he had given me some space, and I'm very interested in music. And so I used the Chapman servers to create a fan website for Duran Duran, who's my favorite band.
That's great.
And Duran Duran reached out to me and said, "Hey, will you do this for us?" And so while I was here at Chapman, I partnered with one of the members of Duran Duran who had launched a record label. And so I was doing work for them. The record label got acquired. The big media company that acquired it then had me do it. The defense stuff came because one of my mom's friends said, "Hey, we just got $30 million in VC funding to transform our defense contracting company into a tech company. What do we do?" And so I deferred my med school admission, and I thought, okay, I'll do this for 6 months. I'll help them out, figure out, what their strategy was, and really, really loved it, and really loved the consulting and, just being able to make like a genuine shift. So I think when you think about it from your current student's perspective, for me, it sounds like it just sort of happened, but I think it's really about identifying what the real opportunities are at the time, and not just what's happening today, but betting on what's going to happen in the future. So it's about a combination of like your skills and interest and what the opportunities are at the time.
And also probably listening to the market. It's like, hearing that story, you're getting a lot of signals, right? Your own teachers like, hey, we need to build this homepage thing, and you've got, this VC or this company that's like, hey, we don't know anything about technology, and you're now the de facto technology guy because
Right.
you had drive, which also seems to be a recurring theme with your story, taking college courses in high school and, picking up a book on how to code a homepage and teaching yourself things that don't necessarily get taught to you in school. So I think what I'm hearing from kind of Kapil's origin story is you've got a lot of this. It's like drive mixed with an astute observation of kind of market timing and opportunity in the future and kind of listening to that market feedback. So, well, I love that story. And so you get into kind of defense tech, you land in kind of consulting, you put med school on the back burner, you end up realizing you love, the technology side of it, the technology consulting. Did you ever end up going back to the med school stuff, or did you just say, hey, listen,
And that was
that
it.
was it? So
Yeah.
you just ran. Oh,
I just ran with it.
great.
I did one of my early mentors in my career. I was very worried because I came from a background where education is very important
Mm.
and having the paper and the degrees is very important. And so I immediately thought, okay, if I'm not going to go to med school and I'm in this sort of business tech consulting, I should go to business school. And I had a very astute mentor tell me, get some experience first. And then when you know what you want to get out of business school, then go. And so that's actually what I did. I did the consulting tech work for many years. And when I started to itch for something different, because you hit a ceiling, right? And particularly in the type of consulting that I was doing, working with government agencies and defense agencies, people who are not ex-military, they hit a ceiling. Because once you start to get more and more senior, then and you're the one bringing the business, it's all about those relationships. And so I saw the writing on the wall that, okay, there's going to be a ceiling, a cap to what I, a non-military person, was going to be able to do in this space. So it was at that point that I said, okay, remembering back to what I was told about business school, okay, now's the time to go to business school to figure out what phase 2 of my career was.
So what about going back to your early mentors' advice? Find out why you want to go to business school before you go to business, or what you're going to study. So what was that why, or what was that, when you realize, okay, it's time to go back to, get my MBA? Was it, I want to learn more about finance. I want to learn more about building businesses. What was the what to go back to get to your MBA?
Well, I think it was twofold. I've always been very entrepreneurial, and I wanted to really understand what does that actually mean in a practical sense and learn skills related to that. But I think the other thing was I wanted to use it as a time to understand where those opportunities lie for me in the future. And I was fortunate when I went to business school. My business school at UCLA is very case oriented. And so you did a lot of small group, study group work. And I found a group of people who were all sort of in an inflection point where they wanted to develop a process to quickly vet opportunities over the course of the 2 years of business school to then identify what course were they going to follow post business school. It wasn't that I had a specific passion that I wanted to pursue. I wanted to use that time at business school to identify where that intersection of passion and opportunity was. And for me, it was in education. One of the things, back to my time here at Chapman with the university honors program, I worked with Dr. Frank Frisch, who again is, I think, a very senior person at Chapman now. And I had to do a capstone project for the university honors program. And working with him, he said, why don't you work with the Orange County Department of Education? They're trying to build like a hands-on outdoor science program for kids, and they need someone to write some sample lessons so that they can pitch this idea. So that's what I did at Chapman as my capstone project. I'm thinking about drawing from my own K-12 education experiences and what were the things that resonated with me, and then leaning on the experts at the Orange County Department of Education and within Chapman University, developed half a dozen sample lessons that kids in public schools in Orange County could go out to our fabulous parks and beaches and other things and see science principles in action. Nothing that I worked on I don't think ever was used. It was more of a demonstration. But that program that was launched at that time is still in use. It's called Inside the Outdoors.
Oh, that's great.
And actually, students at my school participate in those programs now.
No way.
So
That's awesome.
So I got to understand that I personally had a unique educational journey through the public schools in Orange Unified School District. And then when I was at business school, I realized, wow, I'm actually very interested in that. A lot of the stuff that I was doing in the defense contracting was how do enlisted people and adults, how do they learn technology? So it was somewhat education related. And then drawing from my experience here at Chapman, that's when I was like, okay, when I got out of business school, I said, all right, my goal is I'm going to open a school. It took me 11 years from the time I graduated business school to open a school. But that is because I also recognized that I need to figure out where is that window of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And I also needed to make sure that I understood what is it that parents, students, and teachers actually want that's not out there. I would say one of the key learnings that I got out of my time in business school was people approach entrepreneurship and confuse it with invention. And they think, I've got this idea for this great thing and people are going to love it. But it's actually backwards. What you need to do first is you have to identify what is it that where there's a gap, where there's a hole. And then you have to design the product or the service that's going to meet that need. And so having that customer centricity, and I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. They come up with this cool app or this great idea for something, and then they're searching for who cares, right? You got to do it the other way around. You got to find out who cares, and then you got to ask them, okay, you've identified this is a problem. What is going to solve that problem? So that decade in between coming out of business school and actually opening a school, that was the R&D period.
Interesting.
Where I was understanding who the customer is, what is it that they want, and what is the strategy or the opportunity to get there. You know, we're fortunate in Orange County, we have really good public schools. You know, when you compare to other areas, you can't go wrong by going to a public school in Orange County.
It's good to know. I got both my kids in a public school.
Yeah,
so
they're great. The teachers are great. The administrators are great. We've got good facilities. So I can't just say, oh, I've got this idea for a school, because why? Why would anyone want to come to a different school when we have good schools? And initially I thought, well, I'm going to open a private school. But I kept coming up with the same strategic issue that I couldn't overcome, which was when you look at private schools, how are parents picking the private school? They've got beautiful campus. They've got all kinds of programs. They've got, really caring teachers. How do you actually start that? Right?
You need a lot of capital, that's for sure.
That's the problem. You need a lot of capital.
Yeah.
And I've never started anything that took outside investment from the get-go or partners or anything. Everything that I've done has been bootstrapped because I really believe that requires you to be lean, and that requires you to really make better decisions.
Yeah, you got to be all in.
You got to be all in.
Yeah.
You can't make the wrong decision, right? So like my daughter goes to a private high school, and it's amazing. And that was, teams of people who got together to create that school a quarter of a century ago. That really wasn't where I was going, primarily because then that limits your audience, right? Your customer base for a private school are people that can afford the tuition for a private school. I was very interested in having a school that's accessible to everybody. And so the catalyst really came during that research process, when I started to learn about charter schools. I didn't know what a charter school was. From my consulting days, I had a lot of hotel miles. And so in 2015, I drove to Sacramento and I put down my $600 to buy a registration to the California Charter Schools Association conference. Used my hotel miles to stay, at a Courtyard Marriott in in Sacramento. And I went to the conference, and 4 days later, I drove from Orange County to Sacramento. I didn't
Sure.
have airline miles. So on the drive back home, I realized this is how I'm going to do. This is the opportunity.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be a perfect connection. I had a lot of experience in government contracting. I had been working with Mathnasium, so that was really there for me to connect with parents and understand what is it that they're looking for that they're not already getting at school. And so I learned at the Charter School Association how to get a charter approved. I had parents that I was already well connected with who wanted to help me. And so in 2015, I came back from the conference. I wrote the charter petition. We submitted it. And, there's a whole big long story that I'm not going to get into. But ultimately, we got approved for the first school in February of 2016. And we opened the doors in August of 2016. Initially, I didn't know what my role was going to be. I was doing.
You mean after the school opened?
Yeah. I didn't know what my role was going to be with the school.
Yeah.
Because I already had my own business. I already had a job. I couldn't just, because it was mine, I couldn't just put my notice in and move over. So I put together, the charter school is a nonprofit. So I put together the nonprofit board. It consisted of community members, other educators, and actually people from my business school days. And it was the board in those initial discussions when they were saying, well, who's going to actually run the school? That they asked me, like, will you actually work for the school? And so I agreed.
And so that never even, did you ever think that would be an option when you were going through all of this?
I wasn't.
You weren't thinking.
I wasn't thinking that I'm doing this to create a job for myself. I knew I was going to be involved in some capacity. Would that be, a voluntary capacity because my own kid was going to go to the school as a parent? Was that going to be a board member? I didn't know. Everything was, this was basically, it sounds like the R&D was a long time, but the actual going from, okay, this is what we're going to do to actually opening the school was, 16 to 18 months.
Sure.
And I was very much focused on writing grants and figuring out how are we going to fund this. So I did eventually agree, and I wrapped up my association with Mathnasium. Was a year where there was, about 6 months where there was an overlap. That was pretty crazy.
I bet. Yeah.
But now, now OCASA is in its 10th year. We're in our 10th school year.
Congratulations.
And we continue to grow. We continue to be one of the highest performing schools. We continue to be very parent. And in education, we don't use the word customer, but it's a very customer-centric model where our parents are our partners and we listen very closely to what it is that they want while still holding true to our mission and our values.
So real quick, I love this story. I want to go back on something that you said that I think is really important, which is, here you have over a decade of R&D, right? But there was a point before all of that where you said, I want to start a school. Where does that come from? Is did you see a potential problem, or did you have a hypothesis, or was it the little experience that you had in kind of learning and development you just really enjoyed? So you're like, there's a passion here. Where did that initial decision come from? You identified the how, right? The charter, and identified the problems and stuff like that. But I do want to understand, because it's not every day that you get someone that's just like, I'm going to go build a school, right? Like that's a big feat, so where does that even come from?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. I was very lucky that when I went to school, I had the opportunities to participate in some very innovative programs in the public schools. A lot of OCASA is modeled after a few influences that both from my own education and outside. Our schools are very good when you compare them to other schools in California. But when you look globally, it's not me saying this, when you look at different rankings and international
data.
tests,
Yeah.
the data shows that our kids are not achieving. And I believe the American dream and the thing that is uniquely American is that we are a country where really intelligent, driven people also have opportunity to realize their dreams.
Yeah.
They're driven people all around the world, but the environment isn't such where your drive can overcome the other factors that make it difficult for you. So I don't know how true this is anymore, but for a very long time, those driven people from around the world, they wanted to come to the US and they wanted to go to university here and they wanted to build their lives here. And so we were getting really smart, driven people, both from that were born and brought up here like me, and also people that came here. But maybe that tide is shifting a little bit. People still want to come here, but I think people are also happy to stay in their own countries. So I worry that our children today, if they are not given the opportunity to have a world-class education, that may have a larger societal impact.
Sure.
That's also why I didn't want to open a private school. I wanted to open a school that was accessible to everybody because I strongly believe that particularly for the underserved populations,
You got the chip on your shoulder, you got the drive.
the only way to improve your situation is through education.
Totally. Yeah.
I think so. Those are sort of the background, but it's actually a very interesting story. I went to business school, as I said. I came out saying I want to open a school, did the tutoring thing for a while. It was literally in the labor and delivery room while my wife was giving birth in pain. She looked at me and she said, "What school are you going to send our child to?" And I said, "Oh yeah,
What you're thinking about right now?"
I was open a school." And I said to her, "Okay, yeah, no, I think we should open a school." And when we opened, my daughter was in our first grade class.
Yeah.
When we opened the school. So I think it was sort of the micro environment of me thinking about where's
Next
my own
generation,
child going to go to school, but then also that macro view of, really what a charter school is. It's a laboratory. It's a place that's nimble where innovation can occur. And then that innovation can then be pushed out and adopted in other communities, either other charter schools or any other kind of school.
So 10 plus years of R&D, you then streamline the opening of your first school. OCASA is born. What is it? Why is it different from your average public school, private school? And, that much time thinking about the problem, how are you incorporating the types of solutions that you believe are going to, create the next generation of, future entrepreneurs and world leaders? Just love to learn a little bit more about the school and the value proposition.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We've built a school that is centered around the needs of students. And it sounds like a very simple idea, but it's incredibly complex because the structure of schooling has so many different forces pushing and pulling on it. You have the needs of the adults. You have the needs of the parents. You have the needs of society as a whole. You have funding constraints. You have special populations that need different things. And so through no fault of any individual group, we as a society have decided that the way that schooling should work is we actually should strip away as much of the variance in student need and try to categorize what the needs are based on chronologic age. So what we've decided is third grade is when students should learn multiplication. I promise you, there is nothing biologic in development that says third grade is when you should start to learn multiplication. In actuality, you should start to learn multiplication when you're ready, when you have the prerequisite skills to learn multiplication. We don't do that in any other discipline.
Yeah.
When you're learning, say, guitar, for example, right? You don't skip over learning the basic chord formations, right? You don't skip over learning what each string is, right? You don't just say, "Oh, you've been learning guitar for 3 years, now you're going to play Metallica."
Yeah.
Right? That just doesn't happen. But we do that in education. So I need to use the tissue for a second.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about. I mean, one, this resonates a lot. I was actually just running through multiplication tables with my third grade son last night, and I think about this a lot because I've got a 9-year-old son who is a little spectrumy. He had the IEP, that whole thing, but brilliant. And I think what I'm hearing is that your foundational strategy is that customized learning is the best kind of learning because everyone's a little bit different and learns differently. How to implement that, I'm really interested to hear how you do because that's a whole different ballgame. But, as a father of a son who, yes, I'm biased, but also pragmatically, the data supports that he is actually an extremely intelligent child for his age per the traditional school system. I often get frustrated because I want him to punch above his weight, right? I'm like, look, there's no reason that you should be reading the same books if you're reading at an 8th grade reading level. Like, let's put you in a room with a bunch of 8th graders. Like, it's like that's the opportunity here. It's like people forget that if you really zoned in and focused on the strengths of your children and doubled down, which is really what you should be doing, then that's where the real magic happens. But instead, a lot of the time, I feel like he's handcuffed to the traditional kind of chronological clock school system that you're describing
Right.
here, which is frustrating as a parent because I want him to just go release his little butterfly wings and just go see what he can create.
Well, and I think that you have to look at the child as a whole child. So I would not advocate for a 3rd grade child who's reading at an 8th grade level to be in a class with 8th graders.
Sure.
Because academic skill is one thing, but social emotional development is
Yeah.
important too. What our as educators and parents is really to do 2 things. One is to make sure that the kids have those foundational skills that are universally needed. And I think school does a decent job at that, even in a traditional model. The other part that we need to do is we need to give them time for exposure and exploration so that as they go through the process of adolescence and growing up, that they can develop a very strong sense of self, right? You don't want to unfurl the wrong butterfly wings. Right? You don't want to specialize too soon until you really understand what you're passionate about. So what we do at OCASA is, number one is we look at the child as a whole child. We look at qualitative data on their academic skills. We look at quantitative data on their academic skills. We look at qualitative data on how they're interacting with other students, what their interests and passions are, and what are the things that they don't like to do. And we have designed a program that we're primarily doing instruction in a small group collaborative format so that the students are learning what they are ready to learn at the time that they're ready to learn it. And they're simultaneously exploring their passions by doing projects and finding other students who are either complementary or supplementary to their passion. The goal is that by the time you get to 8th grade and we do our 8th grade promotion, our students at the 8th grade promotion, they stand up on stage and they make a declaration. This is my journey up until now. This is what I learned about myself. This is what I think my passions are. And this is how I'm going to pursue going forward.
That's like how the declaration sounds, something like that?
Yes.
That's amazing.
It's called their This I Believe speech. It's based on the book This I Believe. And then in our high school programming, we have career technical education pathways where they can then see that specialization actually what I want to do. So we currently have computer science, engineering, and biomedical science. I want to do more. I want to do like a digital media and gaming. That's where we connect with local industry here in Orange County.
Sure. Yeah.
To identify like what is the workforce. We also have a dual enrollment agreement with community colleges. So students when they're at high school at OCASA are also dual enrolled. Again, pulling back from my background. So if you think about it, what is this TK-12 journey? Learn skills, learn about yourself, make a declaration, think this is who I want to become. And it doesn't necessarily have to be only career focused. This is who I want to become. Career is part of that, but it's broader than that. And then use the high school time to collect credits, reinforce that, validate this is what I want to do, so that boom, when you go to college, you're one of those kids that can get out in 3 years with actual skills that you want to use, that you're passionate about. So we have 2 12th grade classes that are in college now. We don't have any college graduates just yet, but we're tracking that and we're modifying and changing the program. It sounds great. It's really hard to execute.
So that was going to be my question, because as you're talking about this program, this whole child kind of curriculum, this strategy, I'm just thinking in my head, it's like, why is this not kind of the status quo in traditional education, right? To me, it sounds very common sense. So I think that's where you're getting, which is essentially to operationalize this, it's very challenging. And that's likely where our traditional school systems probably break in half if you try and introduce any level of customization.
They do. They're
no fault of their own.
The teachers that we have in all schools, for the most part, 99.9% of them, loving, skilled, passionate, caring people. But the structure, the system that we've put them in is very difficult to really do anything supporting individuals or small groups of children. There has been over the last several years a push for personalization within traditional classrooms. Orange County Department of Education is a leader in the state in this movement. It's called MTSS, Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, which is really, in a nutshell, identifying what individual kids need and providing them the supports. But the structure of the system doesn't really allow that to happen consistently and automatically. It's, we're asking teachers, you're on stage for 7 hours a day with 30 plus kids. You're probably spending your own money for classroom supplies. You have all of these compliance and things going on. We ask you every week to sit in hours of meetings and trainings after school. Teachers are loving, compassionate people. They're taking their own time on the evenings and weekends to plan and get situated and organized.
Yeah.
And so it's unreasonable to expect them to do even more without the resources to do it. So this first 10 years of OCASA, we have done what I'm saying through brute force and manual effort. And the data on our schools demonstrates that the solution is working. Our students are one of the highest performing on the state standardized tests on achievement. But really, the metric that's really going to show you if what we're doing works is growth. So California has released a growth metric. They haven't
growth of the school?
It's a cohort based. So it's individual student growth year over year.
Okay, got it.
They've only released this once. They're supposed to release it again this year. They're supposed to release it once every 3 years. Okay. Our school, it's a decile scale. So it's 10 out of 10 is the highest you can get. So our students scored 10 out of 10 in growth in math and 9 out of 10 in growth in ELA. Now, this is 3-year-old data. They haven't released the new data yet.
Sure.
But what that tells me is that by really understanding what the student needs and creating the environment for them to do it, to have those needs satisfied, we can make the students' academic growth outpace how we're doing it now. And that's what we need to do, going back to thinking about how the U.S. fares on the world stage. That's what we need to do to regain our dominance in academics, is we need to grow faster. So now our next phase. So we're wrapping up and we're halfway through our 10th academic year. What does the next 10 academic years look like? And I smiled when you were talking about your son and reading. The next phase is probably going to involve AI and machine learning.
I'm glad you're going there. I was really curious to hear a little bit about. I mean, to me, what sounds so unique about your structure, your school, is this level and this ability and apparently resources to customize the learning to the individual child and then providing the environment to do that. So, in a world where we have technology advancing at an incredible pace, specifically with AI, and one of the most unique things about AI and these LLMs is their ability to hyper customize to the individual and have this incredible knowledge and context of all of this stuff. How are you thinking about incorporating that into scaling what you do? Because the challenge of what you do now, really to me, is when you have to scale it,
Correct.
right?
We haven't proved anything if it's not scalable and
Yeah.
replicatable. So we are developing what we call our play model, PLAI. So that is personalized learning using artificial intelligence.
Love it. Great acronym.
So right now what happens, I told you that we're using qualitative and quantitative data, right? It comes down to the expertise of the educator to look at that data and determine what standards the student is ready to move on to. Instead, what we need to do, and we don't have it yet, this is a concept. What we need to do is we need to be able to feed that data into a system that is first looking at, okay, the next standard for this kid is going to be multiplication. Let me look and see, do they really know their single digit addition and subtraction? And if they do, what other skills do they have that I can use to teach them multiplication? Are they good with skip counting? Are they good with a repetitive single digit addition? And then let's teach them multiplication through the basis of things they already know. That's one piece of it. And then the other piece is we have to close the loop. Once we have a student that goes through an entire cycle, that data needs to be fed back into the AI so the AI can get smarter and say, okay, I think this is the way to teach the student, but now I have data that says this part of what I thought was correct and this part's not. So I'm going to modify it for the next student. So one piece is that data analysis and the creation of the plan for the student. The second piece is actually the curricular materials, right? Yeah, in education, we have a lot of software programs, but by and large, we're using a very textbook-based approach. Some of those are printed on paper, but some of them are interactive things online, but none of it is truly customized. So the example you gave of your own child, a text written for an 8th grade student, or a novel, I should say, written for an 8th grade student is likely going to be dealing with themes that are not developmentally appropriate for a 3rd grader, right? But what if I could take the text or the novel written for a 3rd grader at a 3rd grade level and put it in the AI and say, give the content to me in the Lexile score for an 8th grader. That's how you can enable small group or whole group instruction, but the reading and the work is personalized to the kid. You can have, and we tried this. We had a teacher who wanted to teach the kids about the Hubble Space Telescope. We found there like 2 sets of things written about the space telescope, cartoony kind of things for little kids and really technical stuff. So we gave the AI resources and said, like, this has the content that we want. Now give it to us in these 4 different Lexile levels. And so then what the teacher was able to do was have a whole group lesson about the Hubble Space Telescope, but then in the small group format, depending on the reading level of that group, they had a different reading passage that met their needs developmentally, but also had common content. So then the teacher could reshuffle the groups. All of the groups had a similar understanding of the content, but they just read it at a different reading level. That's what we have to do. And then we need to, so looking at the data using AI, customizing the curriculum using AI, and then the last piece is that feedback loop.
Sure.
Do the assessment, understand what worked, what didn't work, and have tight 6-week cycles of revision. That's what's going to enable us to grow. Right now, schools are thinking of AI in 2 categories. They're thinking of it. One category is AI is cheating and we want to somehow ban it. There is no firewall. There is nothing that is going to get a school to not let kids use AI. The other school of thought is let's really look at agentic types of things where, um, I was talking with the Khan Academy people, and they're like, "Oh, their AI, you can tell it like I'm Huckleberry Finn, and you can interact with it." That's cute and all, Oregon Trail kind of
Right.
stuff, but I don't think either of those paths are really going to accelerate growth. What we need to do is we need to use a well thought out methodology that we've proven in a paper and pencil approach, and then automate it for growth and scale. So that's what we're trying to do next. And for that, we have to scale the number of locations and schools that we have. So we are opening our new campus this summer in Tustin, and we have plans to open 4 or 5 more locations in Orange
Oh,
County
wow.
because we number one, first and foremost, more kids deserve to be able to come to our school. And second of all, to really prove that we're doing something replicatable, we have to replicate it ourselves.
Sure. Well, it's really interesting to hear you talk about the technology component of what you're doing, because I do truly believe that the way in which you're teaching these children, at least from what I've heard, is the way that I wish I would have learned, because there were definitely, looking back, skill sets that I had, but there were a lot of subjects that I struggled with. I had to be put in an ESL class, and to be clear, English is my first language, because borderline dyslexic, and just reading was extremely challenging for me, right? But I excelled in kind of the external communications and my ability to articulate once I actually understood concepts and whatnot. And so I think a lot about how much more ideal my education would have been if I would have gotten just a light layer of customization to my learning to hone in on my skills and gaps. I'm really excited too about this notion of you using technology to scale, you know, what you're doing now, because if you think about it, you've got a lot of things working in your favor. One, you've got the framework, you've got data to back up what you're doing, you've got the curriculum that you're kind of tweaking and optimizing along the way. But two, I would argue that you have the physical infrastructure, which is something that I think a lot of people aren't thinking about when it comes to deploying AI into their business. What I mean by that is I think there's like a third mode and a third model to consider here, which is the physical model, in a world where you can look at the social cues of children and the nonverbal cues that especially younger children give when they're really enjoying something. My oldest child will not say, "Man, I really like this," but his body language will. And in contrast, when he doesn't like something, he's actually more prone to say he doesn't like it. But again, body language. So I wonder, in a world where you've got AI systems really taking in multimodal feedback, the context of the curriculum, the performance of the output of the test or whatever, and also the physical interaction that these children have with whatever they're doing, and really turn that in to this amazing product, whether it's internally deployed that your people are using to just do better work, or whether it's something that could really scale. Like, I mean, I would love an app like that from your school that I could bring home with me, whether I'm part of your charter system or not, and I'd probably pay for it too. So layer in some subscription revenue to your business model there. It's really interesting to think about how you've got this infrastructure tied in with the right technology that could produce a really interesting product, right? Anyways, first of all, this has been an absolute blast. I want to keep us on time, and I'd love to end with some advice. Look, you're a very established, successful Chapman alum. To the next generation of entrepreneurs, a lot of whom I meet just sitting in this podcast room in any given day, who are thinking about the problems to solve, who are coming up with solutions before they have problems, which I love was a very important point that you made. But to kind of this next wave of students, a lot of whom feel a little bit dire about kind of the economy right now and where to go and what to do with their career, what advice would you give to that cohort, especially these students that are in the entrepreneurial program, but are also just thinking about starting their own businesses and whatnot? I'd love to just maybe end there. What advice would you give to this next generation of you?
Everybody's been told, don't chase money, chase your passion. At OCASA, we have a mission statement. It starts with the word joy. We're a joy-filled, collaborative community. I think that that's very important. We can come up with lots of things that we can run around, make a lot of money at. But why? The money is there. The money is there for you to experience the most out of life and experience the joy in life and fulfill what it is that you wish to be as a human being. And so I think the best entrepreneurs, they start with sort of their own needs and they look for problems that solve a need for themselves and also solve a need for a lot of other people. And then they use their own personal experience and then they use the input of these potential customers to really come up with a solution. And I really think that finding a novel solution for a problem that doesn't bring joy and happiness, you should cross that off. I have a notebook from my high school days of all of my ideas of things that I want to do. And I've summarily gone through and crossed out so many of those things because they technically check the box. Yes, there's a problem. Yes, I think I have a solution that people want, but it doesn't fulfill my own need, right? In the case of OCASA, my own need was my wife and I scratching our heads thinking, what's the kind of school we want our child to go to, right? And so it just so happened that all of those things intersected and I was able to open the school. I see a lot of, I watch a lot of social media. I see a lot of the young people, grinding, coming up with things. And that's great as long as it's fulfilling their needs beyond just a job in a business. It's too hard to be an entrepreneur if it consumes your entire being. You become one and the same. So you better follow something that you want to become one and the same. And definitely don't approach it as an inventor. Okay. You're not Thomas Edison. Okay. You don't have to invent something. What you have to do is you have to really focus on a problem and really find a solution. If a novel invention is part of that solution, great. But it's not all businesses aren't that. And then I think the other thing is you have to really play the long game, really understand who your customer is, really understand what the external structures, the regulatory environment, the barriers to competition. I'm uniquely positioned. I have this government contracting background, so I know how to write grants. I know how to write the charter petitions. I know how to operate multi-site organizations. So all of those things, this is sort of the perfect problem that I can work on. But I'm not done. I'm never satisfied. So once you have your solution, you always have to keep pushing it because today's solution is tomorrow's old idea that nobody wants anymore. So I continue my education. I'm working on my doctorate in education as we speak. And I think that young people who want to follow the path of business ownership and entrepreneurship, they need to future-proof themselves by having the education, building the network, and really following something that follows their joy and passion and make sure that that brings joy to your customers too.
Well, Kapil, this has been an absolutely amazing experience for me. I really appreciate you coming in here to tell your story. Tell us a little bit about your organization, everything that you're doing, especially for those listening. I think the key takeaways for our future entrepreneurs is find joy in what you do, because if you don't have that, it's just going to be a miserable, long road, right? Define the problem before you have the solution, right? And if it takes 10 years to identify the problems, to do it, and grit. I think that your story represents just a lot of drive and grit and confidence. And, whether you see that or not, I just want to give you some accolades on that, because hearing your story, you can tell you got a lot of that. So again, thanks for coming here. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks for telling your story, and hopefully looking forward to spending some more time with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Yes, sir. Cheers.